Hi, folks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Let's get that interesting music down to a level where it's not too distracting, but still gives us a little inspiration. Welcome back to the Omnist Hour. Today's topic kind of shaped up in a sort of interesting way. And I guess basically ushers in maybe a new format that I might use for a lot of my content from now on. If it goes over well, if it keeps inspiring me. I'm going to title this one, well, let me tell you a little bit about what this new format is. So in yesterday's podcast, I talked about who God really was, and explain how that relates to effectively who we really all are as children of the lineage of the first soul, which I am going to now refer to probably more as the All-Father than God, because I think that's a better way to think of the first soul. And effectively, what I'm going to do is try to give you a series of talks about one of the many incarnations of the All-Father while he was incarnating in the same system that you all are. And some of them are going to be well known to you. Who the real Jesus was, that might be tomorrow's talk. Today we're going to go for a less well-known one, but one that I'm very personally acquainted with, and one of a group that we'll probably talk about all 12 of them eventually. Okay. As you may know, if you've been following my channel, humanity is what I call a chosen species. Now, there are chosen people within that chosen species, and there are chosen worlds, and there have been many of them. One way you can think of chosen is as the little nook of the multiverse that God happened to incarnate in for a while. And there have been many of them, thousands and thousands and thousands of incarnations of God. Some of them were, as I told you yesterday, kind of mundane, meaningless, and spawned off a lot of other clones at some point in those incarnations that are responsible for all of you. You're all basically a chip off the old block. And the misunderstanding is that once the chip is separated, it has its own lifetime. Okay, just like a semiconductor chip manufactured in Taiwan might go live among the other Chinese for a while, might get sent to Iran or Iraq or Russia or Ukraine. Has a very different life than its clones, the same chips that go somewhere else, and has a very different experience. Okay? So I like that term, chip off the old block, too. Today we're going to be talking about Ursa Mater, I call her. But you may know of her as Ursa Major. One of the very attractive constellations in our heavens that we look to, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. You know much about those two constellations? Well, it's a mother bear and her child. And I am here to tell you that she represents, maybe even physically, an incarnation of God amongst the bear people. And yes, there was a intelligent bear species at some point, somewhen, that was the chosen species for a while and was important enough to enshrine in one of our important constellations on this planet as a reminder. Okay, so Ursa Mater. This is I think the reason I came up with this one is the first one to tell about, because my idea for these little discussions about God's incarnations, I'm going to be calling all father side chats. And so that the ladies listening won't think I'm sexist or chauvinist, I'm going to do the first one about one of the incarnations of God where he was female. And there were others where he was no sex before there was any sex at all, as I've told you. So, lest I get labeled a sexist, or God gets labeled a sexist because he happens to be preferent for the male of this species, every incarnation I know of God within the human race has been male. Sorry. The females are chips off previous blocks. They are souls who were born elsewhere in other species and impregnated by males, some of whom were chips off the old block a long time ago, and some of which were very recent chips, or even the old block himself. Okay, so this one's going to be Ursa Mater and the all father side chat every parent needs to have with their kids about passion, responsibility, commitment, debt, slavery, and death. A lot to cover in one talk, but we'll try to get through it all. Because I think this is a very important chat for all parents, fathers and mothers, to have with their children at some point while their children are still listening to you. Before we let Ursa Major wander off in the background, I don't, this background is an attempt by an AI art tool to show the mother bear Ursa Major and the baby bear Ursa Minor becoming gods. I'm not sure I think it did a very good job. I think that chip needs to be thrown back in the wood pile again and recycled. Yeah, AIs are chips too. Okay, so what am I talking about here? I'm going to get really up close and personal on this. Ursa Mater, I know, was one of the incarnations of God because it was one of the forms that was given to me during a very special ayahuasca ceremony. One of the first things that I experienced after the, I would call it a machine pterodactyl, did a little bit of operation on me, and I got a little premise of what was going to happen from the entity that I call the, I thought of at the time as the Emperor of the Tall Grays. But I've come to know him much better since that time. So after that, the first interesting experience I had in that ayahuasca ceremony was a sensation of growing breasts. I could feel these breasts growing in my chest, and I could feel myself embodying a bear-like creature. And it wasn't really until I set off on the idea of doing this talk today that I put two and two together and said, oh, I know what's going on there. I'd never thought of Ursa Major being a female, but actually somewhere in my deep dark memories of the story of that constellation, Those constellations, I remember, yeah, it's a female bear and her child, her cub. Interesting. One of the few, well, there are many female, feminine constellations, aren't there? Um, One of the few animal ones that we happen to say definitely this is a female or a male. Well, I guess Leo, by definition, is always shown as a male lion for some reason. At any rate, we're going to talk about the others eventually. I just wanted to share my personal connection with Ursa Mater. So what are we going to talk about today? Let's start with passion. Do you ever talk about with your kids about passion, or do they just find their passions on the street, in the boob tube, on their smartphone, from their friends, from their schools? What do parents teach about passion, and how? What is passion? Now, some people will argue, oh, well, it's sex and all this dirty stuff and all this horrible stuff and that we can't supposed to talk about. So we don't talk about that with our kids. But anybody that's halfway smart knows that's not true. That's a very narrow-minded definition of passion. Another definition that Christians might be aware of is the passion of the Christ. This time in his life where he was tested in his mission, even unto the point of death. And they call that a passion. Anybody who has had a very consuming hobby or interest knows what a passion is, and we all have passions. Some of us have passions for food. Some of us have passions for gambling. Some of us have passions for drink, of an alcoholic persuasion. Some of us have passions for science, passions for art, passions for fandom of I don't want to seem too dismissive, but passions for maybe not so passion-worthy artists like a Britney Spears or Lady Gaga or Justin Bieber. Our passions can be very mundane, can look silly to others, can be harmful to others. They can also be the most incredible thing. And when you look at somebody's passion, sometimes it's easy to see that their passion is kind of dark, leading them to a not very good place. Maybe their passion is being wrapped up in violent video games, immersive video games. And you're worried, boy, that's going to turn them into a murderer. Well, that may be exactly what's needed to train soldiers. That's essentially what they do, and that's why there are so many violent video games, and they're so popular. They're promoted by the folks that want to train your kids to be soldiers, directly or indirectly. That's where they get their advertising revenue. Okay, so passion is a mixed bag. Everybody's got one, and everybody has problems with their passion. Either they're too successful, not successful enough. The passion causes side effects that hurt our relationships, that damage our body, hurt others. So I think it's important to have a talk like this with your children about passion when they're old enough. Maybe simplified versions of it when they're younger, to help them understand what passion is and how we need to be conscious about how we choose our passions, choose how much we let our passions rule us. Not in a judgmental way, because sometimes the passion must rule in order for the right things to happen, to drive creation, to drive evolution. The passion of Hitler to create the Fourth Reich under his enlightened leadership and take over the world for the Aryan race was a very dark passion. But it set the stage for a lot of good things to come out of it. It destroyed the world order that was building out of the Great Depression reset, which in many ways resembled the Great Reset that we all feel going on now. A lot of people out of work, runaway inflation, banks failing, stocks crashing. The world is coming to an end kind of stuff. And a lot of people committed suicide during that time. And a lot of people went crazy. A lot of people learned to be passionate about helping others and work to get through it. And if you ever get a chance to watch the movie Grapes of Wrath, you'll see a lot of that goodness in the movie. You'll also see a lot of subtle advertisement for big business, big government, and a passion for turning the world into an authoritarian, totalitarian state. Communist world. It all has different perspectives as you look at it. Passion is a complex topic. Responsibility then becomes a conversation about being responsible for the choices you make, and the choices that are toughest to make are the ones that involve passion, because those are the choices that we devote most of our consciousness to. If I'm passionate about hanging out with the cool kids instead of going to school, that's going to make it easier to choose to cut school, or to sneak out late at night and go drink and break windows and vandalize the neighborhood with friends, thinking you're having a great time. And I have participated in that passion. I have known that pull. I didn't do it a lot because it didn't seem like a very healthy passion to me. Take responsibility for what you do. Your choices are your responsibility. You can choose to do poorly in school, assuming that the world is just going to throw you stuff on a silver platter because you're black, because you're Asian, because your parents are rich, because you live in state X and not state Y. For whatever reason, you can abdicate responsibility. And as a parent, you can allow your children to delegate their responsibility to you. And I know I did that as a child. I, to some extent, made my parents responsible for my college education. Yes, I paid for a good portion of it, and it wasn't too expensive back then. I paid for part of it with the scholarship that I earned, which wasn't a full ride for undergraduate. I paid for it with the work study that I did as part of the financial aid package I got, which didn't include loans. I didn't take any loans to go to college. Well, I take that back. I did. I think at the end of my 4 years at University of Washington studying physics, I had college debt of about $4,000, which I paid off pretty much as soon as I could once I had a decent job. And my parents paid the rest. Now, I felt kind of guilty for that, so one summer, I knew that my dad had, as one of his passions, had always wanted to have his own piece of land and build a house by himself on that land, and kind of relive the dream that he gave up from his childhood, growing up in the Great Depression, living on a farm with his father and brother and sister, and through very tough times. My dad lived in a very tough time. His father was a high school shop teacher in a pretty poor school district in California, San Ramon, outskirts of Danville. You'd never know that that was poor anymore. Walnut Creek, Danville area is all upscale, and people are building little McMansions out there. Some of my cousins, that's what they're all into. At any rate, he taught me a lot about responsibility. My dad did. He was a very responsible person, a very conservative person. I used to describe him as just to the right of the John Birch Society. He was also a very racist person. He nearly flipped out when my little brother married a North Korean immigrant. So, yeah, didn't really bat an eye when I married, second time, Chinese, mainland Chinese lady. And of course he was dead by the time I married my current wife, an Indonesian lady, who was very, very chocolatey beautiful. At any rate, responsibility is something you got to teach your kids about. Responsibility is tough love. You've got to let your kids take some lumps for their mistakes. If you shield them from everything, you are not a good parent. You are an irresponsible parent. You are a narcissist enabling parent. And this is the dark side of children who have only the traditional motherly influence. You smother these kids with love, and that is not good for them. Contrary to popular mythology, there is such a thing as too much love. And this is one of the hugest problems that has beset the culture that was grown in a successful America after World War II and spread to the world. This is why I spend a fair amount of time lampooning and attacking the unconditional love set in my online presence. I'm sure they think I'm a major league asshole. That's because they know in their heart that I am right. That this love is causing problems. Too much love is enabling love. It teaches children to be irresponsible, to assume that somebody will always bail them out if they got a problem. And that's the same kind of love that a communist state tells you you can have. Oh, it's going to be so wonderful if there's just one party that controls everything and runs everything for the people. Everybody's equal. Everybody gets the same thing. Everybody eats the same dog food. Oh, this is heaven. No, it's not. Anyone who has actually lived among the people, not the party elite, the people, not the toadies of the party elite who own all the stores and run all the businesses and make all the rules. Anybody who's actually been a people in communist China, in Cuba, in communist Venezuela, in the USSR, which still is pretty communist in many places. I know I've been there. I had a girlfriend from there for a while. I was there twice. In the, let's see, it was mid 90s. And they still had stores that were running like a communist store. You could tell there were just a handful of products there, and they were doomed to buy at the government price, the government system, and sell at the government price. And that limited what products they could get. And this is how it works in a communist country. It is not paradise. What happens is there's a two-tier system that develops, even to the point that you have two currency systems. You've got the average people who have to use the pesos. This is how Cuba works. I've been there too, so don't tell me I'm wrong. The average people have to get these Cuban pesos that are almost worth nothing and can only be used in company stores. And then anybody who wants to have any kind of a life has to find a way to get dollars. And there are other stores that operate on a dollar economy. Their tourism industry operates on a dollar economy. Now it's funny because there's not that many American dollars coming in there from America, except for people that are brave enough to go there and know that all you have to do is go to Mexico and take a plane over and nobody's going to bat an eye at you, even though there's no direct flights from the U.S. At least there weren't. I don't know if that might have changed. They were working on trying to change that under Obama. At any rate, back on the topic of responsibility. You need to teach kids that they have a responsibility for their choices and their actions. Even if somebody gives you something, you have a responsibility to look that gift horse in the face and see if it's got strings attached. And this leads on to the next topic, commitment. A responsible person follows through on their commitments. If you take a loan, you are going to pay it back. You don't expect it to be forgiven because, oh, well, I didn't know I'd have such a hard time making the payments, and I didn't know that inflation was going to go up, and I didn't know this and that. So help, Mr. Wizard. Save me from this horrible thing they did to me. Sorry, you made a commitment. You made a stupid commitment that you could not live up to. And if you are bailed out, you are no better than some bankster that got bailed out in any of the financial crises we've had. You are a freeloader. You are a welfare case. You are irresponsible. One of the things that is really different about the world now than versus the Great Depression my dad grew up in. Back in that day, and this is captured, you really got to watch that movie, Grapes of Wrath. It's, at least in some places, if you can change your VPN to be in the US, you can get to watch it for free. Because I think somebody's promoting it as, see, this would be great if we could be communist. Neglecting to point out that one of the key messages that is pointed out there is that a lot of what was presented in that movie was communist advertising. But if you look at the truth underneath it, what really got the country through that period was helping each other and taking responsibility. There's a scene where the old grandpa of this Oklahoma family that's trying to make their way to a better life in California. Imagine that. I mean, think of making a better life in California today, right? Goes into this coffee shop with the two kids, and asks if they have a loaf of bread. And it turns out that they, well, it's a coffee shop. I guess you could buy the whole loaf, but that'd be 15 cents. And he says, well, I've only got 10 cents. And after the waitress is kind of nasty and says, get out of here, you bum, kind of thing, the owner feels a little bit guilty, Christian guilty probably, and says to her, oh, go get the loaf of bread. And then as she comes back in with it, hands it to him, and he says, well, I don't want the whole loaf, I just want 10 cents worth. And the boss says, you know what, that's yesterday's bread. It's marked down to 10 cents. And the waitress kind of looks at him, you just lied. But it's all okay. And then as they're leaving the store, the two kids are looking at some candies on the counter. And the grandpa asks, well, how much are those candies? Are those 1 cent candies? Because he, I guess, has a cent to spend and thought maybe he could buy one for his kids. And the waitress thinks about it a little. You know what? Those are half a penny each. And he hands her a penny, and they get one of these candy things, like a candy whistle, I think we called them when I was a kid. Striped thing, kind of like a candy cane, but hollow. At any rate, they're very happy, and then after the family leaves, one of the truck drivers sitting there says, those things cost 5 cents a piece. And everybody just looks at the truckers like, you fucking assholes. And then they walk out, and one of them leaves the waitress a tip, which was not so common in those days, tipping. Now, maybe it's overcommon today. People feel like they're entitled to a tip. In this case, it was because they didn't probably get very good service from this somewhat nasty when the scene began waitress, but when the scene was concluded, she turned into a person that they admired for doing what she did with the candy. They gave her a tip. And this movie, far from being a sales pitch for communism, is actually a pitch for acting in a godlike manner. Something that is kind of a core principle of all religions, is to give you a sense of what would Jesus do? What would the good fairy do? Everybody's trying to do good. We have a hard time sometimes knowing what's good and what isn't. And that ties back to my comments about too much love. Okay, debt. This is a very important topic that you've got to talk about with your children and make them fully aware of. They need to understand from a very young age that you have a certain income coming in every month. It may be variable, it may be fixed. You may have an idea that it's going to keep growing because you're going to get cost of living raises or bonuses, or you're going to quit your job in 3 years and move on to a higher position in the company, or blah, 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 blah. We can rationalize getting into debt for a lot of reasons, and there are definitely good reasons to get in debt. Most people probably will never be able to afford a house unless they take on debt. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but owing somebody something means that they own a piece of you. The more of you that somebody else owns, the less you are going to be able to pursue your own passions. the less you're going to be able to exercise free speech. Your freedom of action will be limited. And that's exactly where the powerful people of the world want you to be. They want you to be beholden to them. The government wants you to be beholden to them for all the services that they offer. Well, you ask, what services does the government offer? Well, a good government offers the service of a military to protect your country from other countries. An espionage service, which hopefully focuses mostly on counter-espionage, stopping other countries from stealing stuff from your country. But there's a temptation always to cross the line, so you've got to make sure you get your money's worth for your debts. Those that you allow to take a bit of your essence into slavery. So slavery is not necessarily such a bad thing either. And this is another, well, are we done with debt yet? Okay, so in all these cases, anything I talk about, there's good levels and toxic levels. There are definitely good levels of loving your children. And there's toxicity in being too tough in your love. There's toxicity in being too smotherly in your love. There's a good debt you can take that matches the lifestyle you're willing to lead, what you're willing to do to afford that lifestyle. There's a toxic level of debt where your lifestyle controls you. The things that you want control you. And this is the dark side of consumerism. And ladies, you are definitely more susceptible to this than others. You want things. Your eyeballs are bombarded from birth with fairy tales of magic castles and princes driving up in golden chariots to take you to their mansion in the sky. Tell me that 90% of the fairy tales we tell our children, especially the female ones, the boys like to hear the stories about the witches and goblins and giants and monsters that we want them to prepare them to demonize those that we're going to have them fight for us, right? That was the whole idea. The women stay home and cook and raise children, and the men go off to fight or work their asses off in the noble's field, or as an apprentice to the guy that owns the blacksmithy or the store in town. This was the old world system. And it wasn't necessarily all bad. Yes, it had maybe more obvious forms of slavery. But in fact, those forms were in many cases more responsible than wage slavery that we have today. There are countries, even communist countries, especially communist countries, where there may be a whole bunch of laws about how you're supposed to treat your workforce, but if you're in the right place with the right workforce, they'll just look the other way. It's okay if your slaves are Uyghurs. It's okay if your slaves are Falun Gong practitioners or Muslims. It's okay even if they're Han Chinese, as long as they're from one of the poorer provinces, Anhui, Hebei. Yes, I know a lot about this country because I live there. I really live there, not went there as a glorified, well, I did go as a glorified expat on a corporate assignment the first time. But I did a lot more than that in China, and I know a lot more than that about China, about Russia, and about the world situation. And I feel very qualified to pontificate to you. So if you want to call me opinionated, if you want to call me crazy because I don't match up with your ideology, I got this to tell you. Okay, debt and slavery. You need to let your kids know, if you're Americans, even if you're not Americans, because this is a major issue, that slavery was not a race issue. There were slaves of every race, and the most notorious slavers ever in human history were black people. Doubt me? Look at the history of Somalia. That coast of Africa has been a center of slavery forever. They preyed on anybody that wanted to use the Red Sea or the, I forget what the other one's called, the Gulf of Aden or whatever it is on the other side of Saudi Arabia. Those very rich trading centers there, anybody that wanted to get through there had to pass through those pirates and either pay them a ransom or get boarded and possibly lose everything they had and get taken into slavery. This was reality, and it was not a race issue. People who tell you that it was are lying. They are cultural Marxists, cult Marxists, who will lie, cheat, steal, change history, rewrite school curriculums to spread their particular ideology, their particular warped view of who are the good guys and who are the bad guys. And this is what cult Marxism is, which I talk a lot about in other of my content, so you can find out more about that term in there. We are all, to some extent, slaves. We are slaves to the people who employ us. We are slaves to our families. Willing slaves. When you have a child, it means that you are taking on a kind of slavery. You're taking on a responsibility for those children. And having these conversations is part of your responsibility. And deciding what to tell them in these conversations when the truth may be a little bit uncertain to you is really critical. You got to think about this shit. You don't just tell them what some stupid self-help book that made you feel good says to do to raise good children. Oh, this is the #1 bestseller. It tells me all about how to raise my children. You are an idiot. Children are all individuals. They are all individuals who have their own soul. Their own soul that might be young, it might be old, it might have a lot of dark karma, it might have a lot of light karma. It may be this far from becoming a god, where you're clear down there just trying to figure out how the whole system works. Your kids may be much more advanced spiritually than you, or vice versa. And that does not make them an inferior. That does not make them your slave. To the extent we view our relationships as slave-master, and some parents do that, and they create kids that want to get away from home as soon as possible, especially if that slavery includes any kind of abuse. Yeah. Another kind of slavery that people don't necessarily become aware of is how our possessions own us. And you can start teaching your kids about that very, very young. You know how? You make them pick up every last damn toy that they got out that day, come hell or high water. And they're going to see how they are slaves to their possessions. If you don't have time to do that, if you've got to spend so much time on your phone or watching the TV or drinking or out with your buddies or talking to your best friend or working on your car, etc., etc., you don't really have enough time to be a servant to your children. The kind of servant that you committed to be when you became a parent. And that's why one of the things I actually do support is abortion. Not late-term abortion, early-term abortion. And I have a very good, valid reason to say that it's not necessarily murder. Because I know how souls come to inhabit human vehicles. The vehicle gets formed before the soul comes to inhabit it. How? Why? Because the vehicle is not advertising a model, a make, a license plate that attracts somebody, a driver, until it has enough of its character formed. That character is formed from the organs, the sub-vehicles, particularly the brain and the heart. And you're not the only soul involved in this body. There are some other very important souls that chose to be there before you got there. And you chose this incarnation because those souls advertised, hey, we're here. We're waiting for a good soul to come. This is what we've done. This is where we've been. And your guides will look around at what's available, the models that are available for their particular heaven, and say, you know, this one might be a good one for you. The parents are thus and thus, and blah, blah, blah. The heart's good. The brain's not too bad. The brains, which there's not one. Anybody that tells you your brain is one organ is dumb. It happens to be multiple organs. There are two major halves that each have their own specialties, but they can also learn to double for the other. That's why we have symmetry in some of our organs, so that if one goes bad, you can use the other one and you're not completely handicapped. Now, there are parts of your brain that are not like that, that are more like a mouth. There's one right in the middle of your forehead right there that they call the pineal gland. That's a very important piece of your brain, because it's basically the part of your brain that is the primary interface with your soul. Your brain is a coprocessor for your soul. Your whole body is a coprocessor. And something you might want to tell your kids that is a truth, besides what I just told you about the brain, is in fact there is a small brain in the heart. Did you know that? In the back of the heart, there's a little piece of it. I don't know whether you really call it part of the heart or a separate organ, but which is structured very much like a brain. Neurons and processing center that is different from, you know, the part of your system that sends electrical impulses to other organs to move, which is how our brain interfaces with the souls of our hands and feet, and every little piece has its own processor. Some of them aren't very smart. Some are just, you know, I only move this finger when I'm told. Sometimes I'm told to do this, and sometimes I'm told to do that. And sometimes that message comes from you, your soul, and sometimes it's automatic because you're not thinking consciously about that. You're letting one or the other brain or the heart think for you. And this is something that's very important to teach your children, that your body is schizophrenic. It's got multiple personalities, and those personalities are going to pull you in different directions. And you, as the leader, have to make the tough decisions. This is how you teach your kids about diet. This is how you teach your kids about managing money. This is how you teach your kids about how to spend their time. What's a worthwhile way of spending time? Why it's not good to spend too much time playing a video game. Why it's not good to spend too much time watching namby-pamby entertainment or talking to your friends on social media or looking at the latest memes in your echo chamber. Okay? This is something you have to teach them as parents, because nobody else is going to teach them. Because every other teacher that they're going to encounter in the modern world is going to be pushing exactly those things on your kids, because that's one of the chief ways that they get their message into them and break down everything the parent was able to teach them before the world got a hold of them. Now, I'm not saying that we need to make parents gods. And there are some parents in this discussion who are acting like that and who are becoming violent and saying, it's my kid, gonna do whatever I want. And if you try to force him, I'm gonna shoot you. And they will get violent. And that is because they've been programmed to be violent. Cult Marxism programs people to be violently opposed to each other. This is why I also speak out against so-called critical thinking. Anybody who uses that term is knowingly or unknowingly a cult Marxist. They are so polarized about what they know is the truth that they will fight over it. They will just call somebody a name if they challenge their echo chamber in any way, shape, or form. And I've met people like that all over the place, in all the poles of political spectrum. Center, right, left, in every country, in every ideology. There are cult Marxist capitalists, and there are cult Marxist communists. That's the nasty thing about cult Marxism, which is similar. You might have heard the term cultural Marxism. Cult Marxism is the next step. It turns your Marxist polarization into a religion that you would commit jihad or crusade for. And, you know, if you're going to go fight a war over the truth, well, are you sure of your truth enough that you really want to do that? Do you want to throw your life away for a truth that's been programmed into your brain by indoctrination, or by your parents, by your government, by somebody else's government, by a corporation? What are their goals? Are they all good? Are they all bad? If you take an extreme position in any of these, you're helping yourself create a cult or join a cult. And I have seen so many cults on Facebook, I don't know how I could count them. There's the cult of everything is the fault of the Fed. We need to kill the Fed. America died the moment we had a central bank. This is a bullshit cult. I'm sorry to say, you guys are cult Marxists, even though you think you're the absolute capitalist geniuses. If you make capitalism your cult, well, I'll tell you what, capitalism is just an observation of human nature, that we are motivated to get ahead. You need to carry that observation a little further to know that if the motivation grows strong enough, you'll get ahead in ways that are illegal or morally reprehensible. And cult capitalism turns into crony capitalism, where you take advantage of the system to make things better for yourself. And that is a cult Marxist pole of thinking. This is how we got so many people that are taking advantage of and making new rules to give themselves advantage through their power that violate the Constitution, that are absolutely, totally opposed to the principles upon which the United States was founded. At least the principles that we share as the lofty goals of what a godly people, how a godly people would govern themselves. And this is why ungodly governments, governments based on ideas like communism, atheist ideas, social Darwinist ideas, are dark. They don't understand that human nature has its light and dark side. They just think, well, if we just make everybody so smart, teach them so much of what we want them to know, then they will be good citizens, and the good ones, the best ones, will come and work in the government, and they will tell everybody else what to do, and we'll have this perfect society. This is the globalist cult. This is how they think. And they rationalize that thinking based upon their success. I'm a billionaire. How Elon Musk? I must be Superman. Everything I touch turns to gold. Now, to give Elon Musk some credit, he's got a fair amount of humility in what he does. Unlike many of the other billionaires of the world, like the Jeff Bezoses and the Bill Gates. And if you think that you want your child to grow up into one of those, I'm telling you, you are a very bad parent. You may be a very rich parent in your old age, because they'll probably throw a bunch of stuff at you when they've got a lot of stuff, because they're so proud of their DNA. And they want to give back to the right people, which, giving back for a billionaire is a really tough proposition. It's like, well, who do I fit into my circle of those that I want to give back to? Well, okay, the floozy that's been so nice to me and did everything I wanted, and I'll give back to them and enable them until they divorce me and take half my fortune, and then I'll treat them like an enemy for the rest of my life. Well, my parents I'll give back to. I'll give them a lot of stuff because they gave me a lot of stuff and turned me into the man or woman that I am. If that's your goal in a parental relationship, which that's one of the reasons I'm not too fond of Asian parenting. The dragon mother, dragon parent of China is a very dark thing. They have this idea that I need to sacrifice and do everything for the kids so that they can grow up and make a lot of money, and I can retire at 50 and take care of their children and get a chance to enjoy having children for a change instead of being an asshole. And God, I can't tell you how unhealthy the traditional Asian parenting way is. It's so dystopian, especially when it comes into contact with Western materialism. It is really, really dark, and that's not what we want for our world. Things were a lot healthier when we each had our own culture and our own religion and minded our own business. We are not all one. Okay, last topic. Death. What do we teach our kids about death? Because what we teach our kids is a reflection of what we believe ourselves. And if we don't talk with somebody about death, we're going to have this internal conversation that gets pretty dark. Can get either dark enough to commit suicide or dark enough to be existentially afraid of death to the point that you'll do anything to prolong your life. Put your family in hock for $1 million to try to keep you on life support for as long as possible, which, of course, the hospital would be more than happy to, as long as a higher paying customer doesn't need the bed. And we got a good glimpse of what sort of dark places that might lead to in the pandemic era, where you could get more money from a bed with somebody that had, or you could claim had, COVID than you could for somebody that was, suffering from something normal. A lot of people died, not of COVID, with COVID. And this is why it looked like it was such a big pandemic when actually it wasn't that bad a disease. And as we've seen, its natural evolution made it much less deadly. More contagious, but less deadly, and that's what happens with coronaviruses. Their first incarnation, when they produce a very dangerous mutation, can be deadly and can be very, very severe. But the deadlier it is, the quicker it spreads, the more quickly it dies out, because it doesn't have time to spread. If you kill an entire village in the space of time between the village sending to the next village to go get something that they have there that you don't have in your village, it dies out. That's why Ebola is not a scary disease. It doesn't spread readily. Now, if you took the Ebola virus and you started mixing it with other viruses to make HIV, for instance, that spreads not just through direct contact, very fluid contact, but fluid contact that's fairly frequent, like medical treatment, syringes, sexual acts that tend to be somewhat prone towards bleeding. You get something like HIV. SARS, the predecessor of COVID, was not airborne. It wasn't that dangerous. They had a little localized pandemic in Asia. SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, shared a lot of the DNA, a lot of the characteristics of viruses. They're not DNA, they're RNA, sorry. But a lot of the characteristics of SARS showed up with additional characteristics from, some of the early researchers, before they were shut up, said, gee, there's things in this that look a lot like HIV. It better not be airborne. And I don't know if you remember, early in the pandemic, they were covering up the fact that it was actually airborne. It wasn't till it was leaking out from China that, oh, there really is something serious here. It is airborne, and it is easy to spread, and sometimes very deadly, that all of a sudden the Western world got worried. And that was about January of 2020. Late January, early February. I actually had COVID strain original from China around Christmas of 2019, early 2020. It was brought over as an asymptomatic case, I presume, by my ex's sister, who lived not in Wuhan, but in a nearby province, Zhejiang, in Hangzhou. So it had already been spreading from Wuhan within China. Most likely, the folks that I've listened to, and I trust, say that the evidence is that it leaked out of the lab in China around summer of 2019. And it was over 8 months later that anybody was told there was a problem. Now that is criminal. When folks knew what was being experimented with in that lab and what the consequences of it leaking out would be. And that includes folks in China, the Chinese Communist Party, and the folks that were funding that research, who are in the US and who are actively involved in bioweapons research, secret bioweapons research in labs all over the world, which is where they've hid all the black ops stuff that used to be done in the States when Congress started to look a little bit too close at what was going on with the CIA and the FBI and the Department of Defense in the 60s. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if you are doing defense research, you damn sure better do that research in the bounds of your own country if you're actually defending that country. If you're going to export it somewhere else, especially your country's avowed enemy, the remaining communist country of China, that's either as stupid as fuck, or you've got a different agenda that doesn't include the U.S. surviving as the U.S. Death. Death comes to everyone. This is true, is it not? However, it is the body that dies. The soul doesn't die unless somebody focuses on killing the soul. How do we kill the soul? How do you kill a soul? I would argue that killing a soul is killing the ego. If you have no ego, if you have no individuality, if you have no you, that's a form of death. That's a soul death. And there are Eastern religions that focus on soul death. That's basic Buddhism. And much of what are some of the more popular Hindu cults say, oh, death and reincarnation and karma, they're bad things. It's this endless wheel that keeps going around and around, and we've got to get off of it. This is very dark. The soul is immortal. The body's not. The body is mortal. And you've got to talk about this in whatever way you choose with your children. And that's why you cannot have children and not talk about religion, belief. Are you going to tell your kids they have a soul? And what are they going to tell you? What are you going to tell them about the soul? Are you going to tell your kids that there's a God? And what are you going to tell them about that God? Are you going to tell them a fairy tale that's going to be disappointed by what they actually encounter in life? That's going to turn them into bitter, disappointed narcissists who turn to atheism, communism, those fairy tales, those anti-God stories? These are decisions that parents have to make. You've got to, and you can't make them. You cannot teach these subjects unless you really get to talking about death. How many parents have ever talked to their kids about death before they're actually so sick that they think they might die, and maybe not even capable of talking about death? I'll tell you what, neither of my parents ever talked about death. Ever, with us kids. Ever. The closest my parents ever got to talking about death was when my dad sat me down and said, well, I'm gonna make you the executor of my will. And so you're gonna get the copies, and if I make any changes, I'll send you an updated copy. And I want you to do that. And I was kind of surprised because I'm not the oldest child. And by God, that sure was a burden, being the executor of my dad's will, because all my siblings ganged up on me. They thought I was going to try to get the family fortune, which wasn't really much of a fortune. Oh my God, the stories I could tell about families. And let me tell you, death is an important subject you need to talk about. It brings up other important subjects like saving money for emergencies. Why can't we buy this? Because that's our savings. That's for emergencies. If somebody has to get an operation and we don't have money in the savings, where does it come from? Not the tooth fairy, not the insurance company. Now, they cover a little bit of it if you've got decent insurance, but anybody who has been around for a while knows that latest insurances don't cover jack shit unless you've got really huge expenses. The deductibles on insurance these days are so large that most healthy and young people don't want to have insurance because it's less costly to go get what you need done than to pay the premiums and never get anything out of your insurance unless you're on death's door. This is a conversation that drives a lot of others. And if you don't have those conversations in a timely manner, you're not going to be able to do your duty by your children when bad things hit, when things happen, when the shit hits the fan, when Humpty Dumpty falls off the wall. You're not going to be prepared to even look for the pieces, let alone put him back together. And you will have failed as a parent. Now, we all fail in some way. That being a parent is an experiment. It's a test. And it's a test you are doomed to fail. What do we do with failure? We learn from our mistakes. Parenting is a learning experience. If you don't learn something new from every child you have, from every stage your child goes through, from other members of the family that have had children and will relate their experiences, from other families you meet that have children and relate their experiences, this is why we need to communicate as humans. Now, what happens if that communication comes from somebody that's not your neighbor, that, is just some yahoo on the internet that reply to your post and gives you all this wonderful advice about what to do with your problem? They don't know you. They don't know your family. They probably don't give a shit about you, but they do give a shit about their opinions and their cult Marxist beliefs. The beliefs that are so strong that they're willing to fight for them, because that's what we want to share on social media with people, total strangers we know nothing about. We want to get them into our army, our cult. Onward Christian soldiers, onward woke soldiers, onward Republican soldiers, onward Democrat soldiers, onward Russian soldiers, onward Ukraine soldiers, onward I don't like any of them soldiers. The nihilist army. All poles of cult Marxism. That's maybe why that's the topic that you ought to talk about too. When does belief become toxic? And why you should always question beliefs. Why you should always accept other beliefs if they don't hurt you or impact you. One of my mother's favorite expressions that I like to tell people about, my mother was French. She was dual citizen, French-American dual citizen, born of a Norwegian-born father who stayed after World War I, and a French mother in the south of France. And her family had to flee France during World War II when the Nazis decided that the Vichy government wasn't reliable enough to be trusted and occupied the rest of France. And, I have some wonderful stories she shared with me about what the Nazi occupation was like, what that era was really like on the ground, which I'm so thankful for because it came from my mother and not some jackass who thinks that they're an expert on World War II and wants to tell you why fascism really wasn't so bad, or communism was the savior of the world in World War II, or blah, 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 blah. Okay, these self-proclaimed experts who write books about things are dangerous. Not all of them. To the extent that they are cultish in what they present, if they identify as an ism or a particular religion, you've got to take what they write with a grain of salt, because no matter what the topic is, if they're not talking about the topic that they're really passionate about, they are casting that topic through a prism of their cult. And this is the danger of the cult programming that our kids are getting in school today. This is why you're hearing this phrase, the woke cult. It is a cult. It is a cult that's trying to teach a certain worldview that has a lot of untruth in it. That is embraced not because they know it's the truth, they know it's bullshit. But they care more about the cult, the political cult of wokeism, which is basically a cult of celebrity worship and worship of the principle you can be anything you want, you can do anything you want, and anybody gets in your way, they're a bad guy. This is the essence of wokeness that is being spread by the dystopian Hollywood celebrity set. They get so many likes, shares, and subscribes by telling people what they want to hear. And they get all of these sponsorships by people who want them to sell their product because they're so popular. This cult of popularity is what drives cult Marxism. That's why it's so bad now in the internet age, in the age of social media. Everybody thinks they're a goddamn expert on everything, at least to the extent that it affects what they're really passionate about and what they really know something about. Okay? A transsexual person knows a fair amount about the psychology of being transsexual, at least an individual experience of that. That's all well and good. If they turn it into a cult, which they're encouraged to do by the cult Marxist set, who don't give a flying fuck about trans people, they don't give a flying fuck about feminism or racism. In fact, they're actually promoting racism, neo-racism, where black is white and white is black, and good is bad and up and down. This is a cult. The people driving this, the people paying for this, the people promoting it, organizing it, are cult members. They don't care about the issues that they're pushing on you. They're polarizing you and using you as useful idiots to drive a deeper agenda. And that deeper agenda leads back, as all cults do, to this magical thinking idea that if everybody thought like I did, or else, because I control the power, I control the media, I control the world, then everything would be perfect. And this is the cult of oneness, any kind of oneness. One God, one supreme leader, one party, one country, one United Nations. These are cults, cult ideas. Power only works if it's distributed. That's not how God works. I mean, God is not this all-powerful, almighty entity that runs a cult. If you're in a cult, you worship a non-God. Maybe has the powers of a God, maybe has as much experience as a God, but it's not God. And if you worship that person, that non-God of power, you're going to end up in an anti-universe to some extent. You're not going to end up in God's universe. You're not worthy. You're not going to end up in the universes that God's plan initiated. The prime universe, the universe of integration of good ideas, the universe of spiritual science, because God is a Father, above all, the All-Father, the Father of all souls, but also the best damn spiritual scientist there ever was, who realized that, well, gee, souls are social creatures, kind of like humanity. If you want to experiment on them, they better not know that that experiment is happening. Now, this ties in with being a good parent. You need to experiment with your children. Having a child is an experiment, and it casts you in the role of a spiritual scientist. You are responsible for the spiritual development of your child. You cannot ignore it. And if you tell your child there is no God, there is no Santa Claus, there is no tooth fairy, there's only truth and not truth, and our truth is the only truth. If you raise a child like that, you are raising a spiritually stunted child. You cannot deal with life without touching on affairs of the spirit. That fact alone proves that you have a soul. And as I repeat many times, a quick look at the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson, a very accomplished scientist, will prove that, in fact, souls reincarnate. Now, I can't prove that they live forever, but I know what I know about my soul, and I've been around a long time. Thousands and thousands and thousands of incarnations in so many species, so many forms, I lost count. I tell you about some of them that I'm more aware of. I don't want to know them all. You know, there's some people that are all jazzed up about the past life thing. Oh, I'm gonna change my online name to Metatron or Michael, Archangel Michael, because I feel like I'm channeling Archangel Michael. Okay, that's your freedom, your choice. Maybe you might even imagine that you had those past lives, and you're qualified to speak for that entity. I've met very few people of that stripe who actually are sincere. The vast majority of those folks are spiritual grifters, attention getters. They can't figure out any other way to call attention to themselves except jumping in one of these cults. Which one of the biggest ones is the Love, Light, and Oneness cult. Which is so popular that even a lot of spiritual leaders who should know better are jumping into it. Dalai Lama, Pope Francis, this whole bullshit pseudo-religion that they're trying to make together is not the answer to the world's problems. It is going to magnify them. Because if they are successful in what they want to do, they're going to dumb down religion into the lowest common denominator, which is the first level of spiritual awareness. Just one level above, knowing that there's time and space. Oh, there's also something spiritual, but it's all one. This is dumb. This is stupid. It's low consciousness. It's more conscious than the atheist saying, well, there's nothing spiritual. It's all a fake. But it's just like one step beyond that. Humanity can do better, and your children need better than that. And all of the world's traditional religions are a better starting point than that. All of them. I don't care whether it's Christianity, which form of Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, even Buddhism. Core Buddhism is better than teaching neo-Buddhist New Age bullshit. Because at least it has a sense of some responsibility to do good works and to meditate good things instead of this irresponsibility of, I got the law of attraction. All I got to do is meditate and I can draw whatever I want into my life. I can make myself successful. These people are dangerous. And they're even more dangerous because some of them are successful. Why are they successful? Not because their religion is right. Because their gods don't play fair. They give you here's an example that will help you understand how these dark gods work on you. I lived in China for a long time. And at first I was kind of bought into the idea that, gee, this place is pretty cool. You can do almost anything. They treat you like a visiting noble because I was on an expat assignment with Hewlett-Packard. And man, it was heaven. You had a lot of money because you were on expat assignment, and as long as you didn't eat in the fanciest restaurants, the food was a lot cheaper. The girls all loved you, and I was single at the time. You could pretty much do anything. I started a theater company, which was illegal. We had no script reviews. We had no censors. No performance permit. We just found some space that folks would let us use under whatever terms we could arrange, and we put on plays and tried to charge enough money to at least pay the director and the PR person, and actors got nothing. The leader of the theater company got nothing. In fact, after looking at the years I spent doing that, starting up the East-West Theater Company, I think I ended up about 30,000 RMB in the hole, which, how much is that? I guess about $6,000 or $7,000 that I put into that theater company. It wasn't easy to do, but it was important to me. And because I liked acting at the time, and I wanted to do it, and we put on some great plays in a place where you don't normally do that, and that was a great thing. But why it happened, how it happened, I got to tell you some details. Many times we would be performing in a place, and all of a sudden the folks that owned the building would say, oh, we can't let you perform here anymore. Sorry. Somebody from the party came down and decided this was not something that they could support. Some of the people that continued the theater explosion in Shanghai after I left decided they would go independent, and they had the vision of putting on M. Butterfly in China, and which, if you're not familiar with it, is a gay retelling of the Madame Butterfly story. And they cast the most preeminent, the most visibly gay celebrity in China in the lead, Coco Zhao. And of course, it was a greatly attended event the first night, and they were patting themselves on the back, and they got one performance in. Before they could get on stage again, they were visited by the Public Security Bureau and told that if they ever put on a play in China again, they would be deported. I had two other friends who were dancers who started up their own dance school in China because they didn't like they actually didn't mind dance school that they went there to teach at, the Chinese dance school, except that they wouldn't let them put on real performances with the kids, and they wanted to give the kids the chance to do a real performance at the end of their course, instead of just okay, you studied dance with a foreigner, enroll again and you'll learn more dance. They wanted to put on a performance for the parents, at least, like we do in the West. So they went off on their own. Their boss wouldn't support that. They started their own dance school in China and started putting on performances with their kids and their parents and having a great time doing it. Well, their former boss had party connections and was losing business to them. Went through their party connections and got them deported. Never to go back to China again. Everything they'd invested in that experience, everything that they had in that dance class business was lost. And this is what happens all the time in China. It's happening right now. You become a threat or a temptation to anybody in the party with more power than you, and they'll take it. They will nationalize your company. They will bulldoze your house and take the land. And maybe they'll give it. Oh, I got another good story along this line. The first girlfriend I had in China, a nice Chinese professor lady, environmental science, interestingly enough. She was kind of a rebel. She lived in one of the older areas of Shanghai that they were trying to demolish. And she was telling me how the government really wanted them to get out of their house and was pressuring them, offering them, well, we'll give you 2 apartments in the Pudong New area if you'll give us this apartment. And they were holding out. And their whole neighborhood was kind of holding out here. I don't know if that city block was ever demolished, but I'm sure it eventually was, and they put up a bunch of high-rise buildings that are now crumbling. This is what happens in China. This is the truth. It's not all this tinsel town. Oh, they do things so much better than we do. Why can't we be like China? You're fucking crazy. You're a cultist if you think that. I've seen it firsthand. I know what I'm talking about. I have talked to the people and seen how the government abuses their own people in the name of the people. This is what communist countries do. This is what uniparty countries do. This is what your Democratic Party is doing and has been doing. And what the Republican Party was doing when it was run by the same kind of assholes who do not love your country. They love their power. The Bushes were just as bad as the Clintons. And just as bad as the Obamas, and just as bad as the Bidens. And Trump is from the same set and would never have got to where he was if he didn't have somebody pushing him pretty hard. He is controlled opposition. That's why he says such controversial things. It's all part of this polarization. If he really loved his country, he would love it enough to be civil to his countrymen. Think about it. Trump is not the Messiah, or the anti-Messiah that the other side is telling you. He's just a bozo who loves the notoriety of his position, loves the power and prestige that he has grown, even though he's not such a sharp businessman. He's not the sharpest tool in the shed. The anti-Trump clan is right. He says a lot of stupid stuff. Well, to be fair, so does Elon Musk, but I think he's a better guy than Trump. Are either of them perfect? Is either of them the Messiah? Hell no. Hell no. Does that mean there isn't a Messiah? Hell no. There are a lot of Messiahs all over the place, trying to find their way back to godhood. Not to be God, but to be like God, like the first soul, the creator, the first creator. We all create. We all have free thought. We all have free imaginations. We are all free to create within the bounds of what we're willing to do to create, the risk we're willing to take. And this ties back to the issue of passion, which was we got to earlier. Passion is your will to do something that is uniquely your choice. If you want to have dark passions, if you want to have addictions and dysfunctional relationships that consume your life, that is your choice. It is a choice. It's not something somebody else did to you. Well, maybe sometimes it is. You know, there was a time where a strong caveman might walk up to an unsuspecting cave woman, bash her over the head, take her to his tent or a cave, and have his way with her. Maybe, well, it still happens in China. I don't know if you've heard this story, but just recently, the Chinese net was all ablaze until they took it all down about this lady that had been kept chained in a little hovel of a house by her husband for, I think it was something like 12 years, because she kept trying to run away. And that's the way he dealt with the situation. You cook, clean, and provide children for me and entertainment, and I will feed you. Yes, that kind of stuff still does happen, and it happens in China, in a communist country, in a Marxist country. You say, oh, well, that's not real communism. Bullshit. It is. That is their ideology. They're still selling that ideology to their people, and they still use it as the core reason for being. It is a communist party. It is not, oh, capitalism messed up communism and the Chinese have become capitalist and that's why they're doing so many bad things, and if they just get back... God, you guys are cultists. I'm sorry. And cultists don't make good parents. Any cult. If your idea of Christianity is just like, well, I'm just going to go into a daze and let Jesus make all the decisions for me. That's a cult. That is a real cult. It's an irresponsible cult. If you're of the variety of Christian that says, well, you know, I'm just a lowly human being and I'm not perfect and I sin and stuff, but I believe in Jesus and Jesus is going to forgive all my sins and take them from me, and this is a cultist. This is a cult of irresponsible action. I'm sorry, folks. If you're teaching your kids that, you are teaching them to be cultists. Now, that's not to say that all of Christianity is a cult. There are other people that teach the truth about Jesus, that he was kind of a salty character who saw what was going on outside the temple, all the money changers and sellers of sacrificial animals and bullshit like that. And he turned over their tables and said, you're not servants of God. You're not any way, shape, or form part of the faith that I have. The faith of our fathers and mothers. And the faith of the All-Father that I talk about in these All-Father side chats, fireside, father-side chats. So, till next time, this is Rob Trump with the Omnis Hour. Like, share, subscribe, do anything you want, suggestions for the next episode. Otherwise, you'll get pot luck or kettle luck. And the pot might be black, or it might be rainbow colored, or it might be white. It might be purple. I kind of like the color purple. I don't know why. That's why I called my mission Purple Passion Productions. If you like something about it, consider supporting it in any way, shape, or form. I'm okay. I got a beer today. My mother-in-law brought over some food, and my father-in-law came and did some of the housework that I don't like to do so much because I think the maid quit. Yeah, we have a maid. That's one of the nice things about living in the third world. You can have a maid. You know how much a maid makes in Indonesia? Take a guess. Take a wild guess. About $100 a month. A month. And they're glad to have it. It's what keeps their family alive. It's very hard to be very disconnected from the human condition when you live in the third world. And yes, I could probably give more than I do. I think the work that I do with this channel is far more important. And I have certain needs in life, certain expectations, like having a beer once in a while, eating regular, and getting to have, oh God. I never thought I'd admit this, but I actually crave Big Macs. That's about the only relatively cheap Western food I can get here. And especially get delivered in less than an hour and a half. Because I'm very far away from the city lights of Jakarta, or even the minor city lights of Bandung. I live in a little suburb of Bandung called Bale Endah. Bale End. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good name for most of this town. We're in a pretty nice area, and I got a pretty nice house. And I certainly have a wonderful family. So I'm not complaining. But I'm just pointing out to you that you shouldn't be complaining either. Even if you've got children, even if you feel stressed, you took a responsibility for your life, or you should. You got to where you are partly because of who you are, the choices you made in life or getting to this life. You have certain privileges, certain rights that you may not have earned, that you might need to prove yourself worthy of if you want to go to a better heaven. And let me tell you, you're not going to get to a better heaven by just saying, I believe in Jesus. I'm saved. Doesn't work that way. You're not going to get to a better heaven by meditating your way to nirvana. Eyes wide shut, let me tell you. Spiritual bypassing. That's a term you might want to get familiar with and teach your kids about. Spiritual bypassing is taking the easy route to real success, which real success is always spiritual. We pursue power, we pursue notoriety, fame, because it makes our spirit feel superior. If you bypass your way to superiority, develop an aura of false superiority, which is what social media is all about, right? I try to be as outlandish or as attention gathering or whatever, chest beating, virtue signaling. Look at me, I'm so perfect. And to the extent that you can get a bunch of followers, you'll get sponsorships, you'll get money coming in from Patreon or from here or from there, and you'll think you're a god if you're successful at that. Well, let me tell you, you aren't. You're a spiritual bypasser because you've sold out. You've become a slave to your ambitions. You've become a slave to your passions, and that was your choice. Slavery is a choice, and you're always going to be challenged. And slavery is not necessarily a bad thing. Submission's not a bad thing. Letting God lead when you're not a very good leader is maybe a good choice. I'm not putting that down per se. I'm telling you that it's a dangerous pull of spiritual bypassing. You can rationalize a lot of bad behavior if you don't have to take responsibility for what you do. And if you don't take responsibility, if you don't consciously do the things you do and take responsibility for them, that's going to tell the gods that you need discipline. You need somebody to rein you in. And that's what the universes of the gods that are authoritarian, that are control freaks, do. They train souls to behave. This is where the concept of hell comes from. This is what hell really is. Are the heavens that are run by gods who teach the dark lessons. And those dark lessons can often look like a yellow brick road. Easy spiritual bypassing. Follow the yellow brick road, and everything will be perfect. Don't worry about the wicked witch. You can throw pixie dust on her, douse her with water, and she will, I'm melting. These are nice fantasies, these are nice fairy tales, and there's a lot of useful things that can be taught through them. But you've got to get through the spiritual bypassing bullshit to really lay out what's useful in these stories to your children. And there are new fairy tales being told in new books. I'm not going to go into it right now, but some of my previous podcasts are about specific children's stories that are being rewritten right now as we speak, to have a woke message instead of the original message. Now, is that bad? In many cases it is, because the woke cult is a cult of spiritual bypassing. It's saying anything goes, you can do anything, you can be anything, and it's all okay. How many times do you hear about karma? Do your kids ever hear that word? Or at least some talk about, well, God will get you for that, which is kind of the darker version of karma. If you're not talking about things like that, you're not talking about responsibility in a way that a child can relate to. And if you look at a lot of the children's stories of tradition, especially of the better children writers who really knew something about human nature, like Aesop, you will know that the lessons can be very dark, but they teach lessons of responsibility. They also teach other lessons of, lighter nature, sharing and caring, and et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of values that are encompassed in the traditional children's literature. And there are different values being espoused now. As a parent, you have to be responsible for what you expose those children to. And believe me, if you just set them in front of the TV set, set them in front of a smartphone, and say, or hey Google, entertain my child. Let me tell you, you are a very irresponsible parent. Now, maybe that's what you got to do because I got to go to work and I got to do this and I got to... Okay, I understand. But you took that cross on yourself when you decided to have a child. This is a responsibility, a major league responsibility. It's not an easy job. You've got to do it or you've got to get help that you trust. This is why traditionally families raised children together. If a family couldn't raise a child, it was done as a community. In your community, by the community. This is what I love about the Islamic culture here. There's a lot of bad things, and there's certainly a lot of bad people in an Islamic country. But the one core value of Islam is the value of community. Every little community has its imam who does the prayer calls. 5 times a day. That's one thing I don't like too much. The first one is at 4 a.m. and the last one's about midnight. I don't know when they give you time to sleep. This damn country. At any rate, you can hear the prayer call everywhere because literally there is a little mosque every few blocks for each neighborhood. And it is the centerpiece of that community. They have a parallel administrative centerpiece, but it's kind of runs in tandem with this spiritual community. And it's a great thing. It can be a bad thing too. Don't get me wrong. There's dark sides to it. And to the extent that Sharia law is morphed in, this is something that people don't understand about Islam. There is not just one Sharia law. The Sharia law that they have in Saudi Arabia, maybe some other parts of the Middle East, is not the same Sharia law that other Muslim countries have or other Muslim congregations have. In fact, it's a very flexible thing. Any Muslim that really knows the Quran, has read it, researched it, knows that the law is like, okay, we believe in the 10 Commandments, and here are some general guides about how to be a good Muslim. This is all that's in the Quran. It's a few comments and a few paragraphs. There's nothing in there that says women are chattel. There's nothing in there that says you have to go commit jihad and anybody that doesn't believe. This is all political bullshit that's been added by folks that aren't really Muslims. They're members of a different cult. A cult of power, a cult of personality worship, or whatever, who wanted to control the Islamic world at a wider range than their own little community or their own little city-state or whatever. When Islam began, the world was a very different place. There weren't these big nations around. The biggest nation around was the Eastern Roman Empire, what was left of it. And yes, there was a certain amount of counterculture to that, and that's how Islam started. They didn't like this Eastern Roman Empire and the Christianity they were pushing, Orthodox Christianity. And they didn't much like the Catholic Christianity that was starting to come out of Rome. And they liked the ideas of Jesus, They just didn't like this idea that Jesus is somehow a God and the only prophet and the one that we need to focus all our attention on. And many Muslims don't realize, non-Muslims certainly don't realize, that much of the Quran talks about the teachings of Isa, Jesus. Talks about the wisdom of Solomon, Suleiman. Talks about all sorts of useful things that they have in common with the Jews. Christians have in common with the Jews. They're all trying to make sense of the same book. The funny thing is that almost none of them are studying the book in the language in which it was written. How many Aramaic scholars do you know who actually will translate words properly? There's a whole cast of characters trying to make some sense of that, and realizing that, geez, the Bible is not really a story about God. It's a story about powerful beings that some people say, well, gee, these must have been aliens. Or maybe they must have been a lot of different gods that were fighting. Pretty much the same story that the Greek myths tell. And the 12 of the Pantheon and their wars between the previous rulers of heaven. If you're not teaching your kids about the broader scope of religion, you're giving them one dogmatic version that this is the truth, the full truth, and nothing but the truth. You're teaching your children to become part of a cult, for better or worse. And they will either accept the cult as their programming, their conditioning, or they will reject the cult. And if they find a cult that they like better, they'll go join that cult, because you haven't taught them how not to be cultists. Yeah. So if you talk to them about religion, and it's a very one-sided conversation, you're really not a very good parent. I'm sorry to tell you this. If that's the kind of Christianity or Islam you're giving your children, you are giving them cult programming. So if you're a Christian, I would encourage you to have a more broad-minded view of Christianity. The Christianity I call omnist Christianity. Some of the schools of Christianity are more like that, more tolerant, more open-minded. If there's one of those and you really need a congregation, I know an omnist is a fairly lonely person, because everybody wants you to join their cult, and the moment you speak up against it, out you go. I've been kicked out of more echo chambers on Facebook than probably anybody in the universe. Because I don't just accept what's there. If I don't agree with what's said, I will post a counter opinion. And I rarely agree with anything that's in a meme, because memes are so simplistic, so narrow in their focus, so narrow in their interpretation of something, that they're banal. Banality is the essence of our culture now. This modern Hollywood, plastic, Las Vegas, Shanghai culture is fake. Cult, sure. That's not what we need. Anyway, I've been talking too long. Like, share, subscribe. Tune in again to the Omnist Hour. Happy Karma.